Hi everyone, my name is Gleasman and I'm going to talk to you about my Teaching with Games course that I've created for the final project in Edit 8400. It's been a pleasure kind of collaborating with some of my other fellow classmates to kind of finalize this plan, and I can take you through just my thought process and show you some of the instructional decisions I had to make. This course that I'm actually creating, it is a little bit different. It's not necessarily teaching with a specific game, but it will be actually having pre-service teachers design their own games using block-based coding. So the title of my kind of research interest, as well as the course that I would be teaching, is using block-based programming to teach elementary mathematics conceptually. And I actually will be teaching an Edit 4000 course here at UGA in the fall. It's a 5-week, 1-credit course that will be based around this theme. But to just give you some background of the problem that I kind of came across and why I kind of landed on this topic, was that Suarez and Chestnut, they wrote this article and they stated that teachers believed in the merit of Common Core state standards, but they were constrained by their inadequate content knowledge, the limited aligned curricula resources that they had access to, and the lack of student readiness, and their perceived mismatch with some English language learners. But I really want to focus on the limited alignment with curricular resources. So I kind of found this problem when I was working in this small rural elementary school. It was called York Elementary, and it was in New York. And I would kind of bounce around. I was a long-term sub, and I would bounce around the hallways and kind of help elementary teachers teach math. And they were struggling to teach mathematics conceptually, kind of how the standards were worded, and how the standards kind of wanted this new math to be taught. And that's kind of how they described it. It was new math. So there obviously is a need for conceptual mathematics teaching. Procedural learning equates to lower rates of comprehension and conceptual understanding. And many teacher education programs, although I believe this is not the case at UGA, they have not prepared elementary teachers to teach mathematics conceptually as national standards kind of demand in this 21st century. But I think a larger issue is that there are these negative connotations that both students and teachers have about mathematics. So there may be some anxiety around the subject itself. So what I'm proposing is that we kind of have a proposed instructional bargain that we can cross-cut some of these ideas. So within block-based programming, there is some inherent math concepts that are kind of cross-cut with some computational thinking concepts. So the next generation science standards kind of emphasize this idea of cross-cutting. So in a mathematics context, we can kind of cross-cut computational thinking and mathematics to help kind of have a deeper and promote a deeper understanding of these mathematical core ideas. And some of them could be identifying patterns, cause and effect, and just some common vocabulary. So the research questions I set out to answer, and you might be asking, you talked about a course development. I'm kind of doing both sides of this. I'm having hopefully a research study happen while I teach this course. So the development of some of these research questions and instruments are going hand in hand with the development of the course and the instructional decisions I'm making. So the research questions that I set out to kind of answer is: how do participants' beliefs about conceptual math teaching change after designing a standardized elementary math lesson using block-based programming? And then what major connections do pre-service teachers make between computational thinking concepts and mathematics standards? The way I kind of aim to measure this will give you some ideas into the instructional decisions I made. There will be a pre and post survey, which will probably be it won't probably be. It's more focused on the teacher belief aspect about mathematics teaching and learning, and trying to gauge where they stand with this whole debate about conceptual and procedural teaching. They'll be provided some scenarios and have to choose which one they would use in their classrooms. There would also be some post interviews after the students kind of go through the course. Within the course, they will be taught Scratch, which is a block-based programming platform, and they will actually design some lessons using Scratch as a almost like as a manipulative, but as a tool to teach mathematics. So within Scratch, you are forced to code. You could be coding a game, you could be coding simply a challenge or an activity, or even a visual story. But within the coding is where the math concepts kind of lie. It's not just about a game, like a skill and drill type game to teach math, but it's about the math that is inherent in the coding language. So we're going to look at some of those lesson plans that they're going to create, and then also kind of hopefully triangulate all of them to come up with some answers to these research questions. So I actually have conducted a pilot study previously in an Edit 2000 course. The problem with my Edit 2000 course is I used a few of these instruments, but my demographic was very different. I didn't have all pre-service teachers, so I had various majors, but I still did get some quality data from it. I looked at the Common Core mathematical knowledge domains, and I organized this chart in a way to show which students chose to focus their lessons using Scratch around these specific domains. And I'll give you kind of a breakdown of this, but that's this chart. We can see that operations and algebraic thinking at first grade was a very popular one, as well as counting and cardinality in kindergarten. I also broke this down, was the frequency of mathematical knowledge domains and computational thinking concepts. So how frequent did they make these connections with these 7 computational thinking concepts, which were highlighted in Brennan and Resnick's 2012 piece. And so we can see that some of the more popular ones were operations and algebraic thinking, and they connected them to sequencing. Similar to numbers and operations, they connected those to loops 4 times. But these were kind of some of the main takeaways I received from that pilot study. That 16 out of 21 Common Core mathematical knowledge domains were incorporated into the lessons integrating block-based programming at the K through 12 or the K through 2 grade level, which is interesting because a lot of people think that coding is much more appropriate for like 3rd through 5th grade. So I'm interested to see if this changes when I change my context and my the demographic of my students, if they're all pre-service teachers, how they will perceive and what types of standards they will choose. We can see that numbers and operations, operations and algebraic thinking, and counting and cardinality were the most represented mathematical domains within that K through 2 range. Conditionals, which research shows are actually the most difficult to connect with in any coding scenario or learning environment. They were connected to mathematics the least, and that was only once, while sequencing, which is kind of relevant and is in every type of block-based coding kind of platform or any script that's written, sequencing is always there. So that was not very surprising that it was there 20 times, and that students identified it 20 times. Same with events with 16 times. That's used very frequently as well. But operators connected to mathematics 12 times, and were used solely when teaching mathematics standards categorized under the measurement and data, numbers and operations and algebraic thinking. So I tell you all of this um, to kind of give you some insight into the goals that I have, but also some of the instructional decisions I made when making the Edit 4000 course and when I'll teach in the fall. So my goals are to establish practical integration of block-based coding Scratch aligned with elementary mathematics standards, and I want to engage pre-service teachers in the thinking and learning of computational thinking and mathematics in an innovative way, hopefully giving them an innovative teaching strategy. So in Edit 4000, this course that I'll teach in the fall, I went and recruited only second year early childhood pre-service teachers. So I kind of limited this, the demographics of my students. I also provided them some scaffolded standards, some lists based on the data that I received in that pilot study, so that they can kind of be guided into at least a domain, not the specific connection that they're making, but showing them that there are some domains that have been visited more frequently, and that perhaps can kind of limit their search on hundreds of standards. I also will have some exemplar lessons. There's a repository online I'm creating, and it can be shared, and hopefully by the end of a couple iterations of this project, I'll have a big repository where there will be some quality lessons that can actually be used in classrooms. So each iterative cycle I do of these studies, I'm making some instructional decisions like those two kind of major ones I stated above, but also this idea of using coding, which is actually pretty procedural. It has some procedural rhetoric behind it, and try to infuse this conceptual understanding of math. And a lot of people think of math as a procedural discipline as well. So I try to balance those two topics. And while I do that, I have to make some instructional decisions about how am I going to incorporate, do I introduce conceptual math first? Do I introduce coding first? Do I treat them as two separate disciplines and then try to merge them? Or from the beginning, do I treat them as one? In this Edit 4000, I'm going to try to treat them as one by showing some modeled lessons and going about it that way instead of treating them separately as I did in the Edit 2000 study. And these are my learning objectives, so I'll end with these of kind of what I hope my students will take away. But when they complete this Edit 4000 course, they should become fluent in using Scratch. I tried to narrow these down because it's only 5 weeks, so they might seem a little simple, but I think if they can complete these learning objectives, they'll have a good foundation in using block-based coding to teach mathematics conceptually. So they have to identify how Scratch embodies and reflects basic mathematical principles. So that is how the actual coding language embodies and reflects basic mathematical principles, not just that game or activity perhaps that they're coding, but the actual act of coding, and they should promote the act of coding in their lessons. And the last one is to design learning activities incorporating block-based coding that enhance mathematics content specified by the current Georgia Department of Education standards for grade appropriate instruction. I've switched over to the Georgia Department of Education standards. They're pretty similar to the Common Core standards. I'm from New York, so I use those during my pre-service teacher education. But here in Georgia, they are more comfortable with the Georgia Department of Ed. So that is another kind of instructional decision I've made for the Edit 4000 course this fall. But thank you for the great semester, everyone. It was good discussing all of our readings and kind of seeing what learning with games is all about. So I hope you enjoy this presentation. And if you're looking to sit in on a quick elective this fall, you can come in and stop in Edit 4000 and hopefully maybe give me some more critiques. So thank you so much and enjoy your summer.